Thank you so much, and it's an honor to speak with you all this morning, afternoon in Iceland. I'll make my remarks brief and take you through some basics on what we see in the United States in union busting, and sadly what we see increasingly around the world as other firms in other countries learn some lessons from the United States, and as US union busters and anti-union law firms seek new markets around the globe. So I have just a handful of slides to present, and hopefully this will help for those of you who are not, for whom English is not as easy. But certainly your English is no doubt better than my Icelandic. So I appreciate your listening in English or in translation. But if I'm going too fast, please wave your hand or say slow down. But I will do my best to be brief and to the point, but also clear. Okay, I'll share my screen here. All right, hopefully this works. And go into mode. Okay, so I work, I'm the Deputy Organizing Director at the AFL-CIO, which is our labor federation in the United States. We represent about 12 million union members in the US. Our organizing department serves as a training operation, research operation for our labor movement broadly. And this topic of union busting is one of the topics that we're devoting a little bit more attention to. So as I mentioned, this is one of our exports. I would rather be here talking about one of our better exports, whether that was, rock and roll or baseball or something else other than the union avoidance industry. And it is a whole industry in the US and sadly in other parts of the world. But we're seeing an increasing style of US union busting in Europe, in Latin America, even in Asia now, and Australia too. And as a corollary to that, we're also seeing when European firms operate in the US, they are playing by a US playbook, not by the same standards that they treat European workers with. We see that in Volkswagen and Mercedes, and a number of, especially in the auto sector, with companies coming to the US and playing by the lowest standards. So we feel a special obligation to help out and to share what we've learned with our union brothers and sisters around the globe. And it is a spreading industry. Just one example, Littler Mendelson is one of the US law firms that does union avoidance. They advise companies through negotiations. They try and stop workers who are forming unions. They've expanded over the last 10 years dramatically across the globe. In 2015, they opened offices in Germany. Now they have 4 offices in 4 German cities. In 2019, they opened an office in Norway. And in 2020, they opened an office in Austria. So there's, just one example of the kind of spread this is having. So what is union busting? It's not just being anti-union or preferring to have a contract that is more generous to management and less generous to workers. Union busting is an attempt to destroy or dramatically weaken new or existing unions. So it really goes beyond just, hey, we'd rather have a smaller contribution to the pension system this year. It's really, how do we stop doing that altogether? Just, wipe the board clean. Its roots in the United States come after World War II. During the New Deal and during World War II, there was a kind of consensus that emerged between labor and companies in the United States that collective bargaining was part of how we were going to do business in the United States. It was, no doubt an effort to weaken the left in the United States by having collective bargaining as an alternative. And for some people on the right wing, that arrangement was anathema. That arrangement was a terrible idea, and they wanted to see it stop. They really wanted to get rid of the whole, what we call the New Deal, which are the reforms that came into the United States during the Depression. There's a fantastic book, if you're interested in learning more on the origin of both anti-union behavior and management and the right wing in general in the US, called The Visible Hand by a historian named Kim Phillips Fine. It's really excellent. And it traces both the sort of real hardcore right wing conservative movement of business in the US, as well as its roots to racist policies in the United States as well, because there was a huge portion of the people in the United States who couldn't stand the idea that you would have white workers and black workers in the same organizations as was happening in the 1930s. But they over time, they built their power. They convinced people that free market fundamentalism was the only direction to go in. And we saw that spread through business culture in the 1950s at General Motors, at Kohler, sort of culminating in 1980, where the federal government just fired all of the air traffic controllers in the United States what was called the Patco strike in 1980. Ronald Reagan, who was president of the United States, fired everyone when they went on strike. And that kind of said to US business, the gloves are off. You can bust unions if you want to. So moving on to sort of, what's at risk with this kind of, if union busting continues. And I'll just show this chart as an example of where things are in the United States now. The red line here shows the union membership rate. This is the portion of the workforce in the United States that is represented by a union, falling from a high in the late 60s, just below 30%, to today, where we're just a little bit above 10%. That line, if you were continuing past 2009, would be relatively flat. We're not exactly growing, but the line is flattening. Hidden in this number is actually a lot of organizing that happened in the public sector and healthcare and in education. But the general trend is a downward slope for union density in the United States. And organizing, forming unions in new workplaces is extremely hard in the United States. Not impossible, but very hard. And the union busting movement has concentrated in large part, though not exclusively, on stopping workers from organizing in new unions. And they've done that by making the process, in the US context, unions are formed on a firm-by-firm basis, sometimes even a location-by-location basis, and there's an election to make that happen. They've concentrated their efforts on really making that election process an absolutely horrific thing for people to go through. So what's at stake here is that blue line shows the middle class share of aggregate income. So this is taking the middle 60% of the economy of the workforce and seeing what share of all income are they getting. And it's a pretty staggering correlation. This is the slide that, as an American unionist, keeps me up nights. This is what we need to reverse this trend if we want to have a democracy that broadly shares its benefits with everyone. And you might ask, well, where is that share going? It's going to the top 1%. So here's overlaying top 1% income onto that same chart in green there. This is the story of runaway American inequality. And it's the story that American business, wants to bring to the rest of the world. It's about taking money away from the middle to redistribute wealth upward. So don't let that happen. But how does it happen? So here are the tactics of union busting campaigns. We see a violation of the norms of social dialogue. It's very common that union avoidance firms, the law firms, the consultants, if you read their manuals, they say our number one job is to convince the supervisors, the frontline managers, that the sky is falling. It's a US, I don't know if it's an idiom outside of English, but that the world is about to end unless they stop the union from gaining power, from negotiating a good contract, from forming a union. And to do that, they have to push people to change how they've done business in the past. So what are the other tactics? Captive audience meetings. So this means mandatory meetings that people have to attend, that workers have to attend, where they are fed a vision of the change that the company wants, that, and that paints the union in horrendous light, where the union is not allowed to speak, where workers are not allowed to speak, and that they can go on for, incredibly long periods of time, just to sort of, you might call it brainwashing. If you have a chance to see the Netflix documentary American Factory, there's an example of a captive audience meeting caught on tape in that documentary. Vote no committees. So this happens a little bit more in new organizing campaigns, but it happens in bargaining campaigns as well. The union busters will create a committee of workers who are sympathetic to management to present themselves as an alternative to the union. Persuaders. So in the case of, the union busting campaigns will oftentimes hire managers to go into the shop floor to interact directly with the union members to try and convince them that the position that they've taken in bargaining to organize is the bad idea. In the case of Nissan, recently held an election, the workers at Nissan held an election for a union in Mississippi. The management hired over 100 new managers who were persuaders, who were trained in anti-union tactics, and they seemed like they were Nissan managers. They wore Nissan shirts. They were actually employed separately by a anti-union law firm to come in and try and talk workers out of organizing. Oftentimes, these campaigns are done in stealth. That example of the Nissan, those workers didn't know that those weren't regular managers. There's a massive use of printed materials, of video, of social media in these campaigns. We see that all over. There's a whole vein of union busting that involves psychological testing. So a lot of US firms do psychological testing on people before they're even hired to try and stop organizing. That's a really interesting topic that we can go in greater detail about. But you see this system that developed in the United States where employers say, we'd rather just remain union free, and that they try and make their hires on a basis to keep people who might be at risk of speaking up pushed to the side, never hired in the first place. Another characteristic of anti-union campaigns is faked impartiality. Oftentimes you'll hear managers say, like, we're not anti-union. This isn't really just about, we don't hate unions. We just need this to survive. We just need this for the next contract, or we can't have a union just because there are market forces that we can't control. It's not about actually us not liking solidarity or not liking unions. They oftentimes also dress themselves up in a fake impartiality. So, for example, one of the union busting firms in the United States is called Labor Relations Associates, and they present themselves almost like they're a branch of the government when they come in to explain things to workers. Like they're just here to just the facts to present to people, but of course they do it in an incredibly biased way. You also see union busting really pushing hard in bargaining to invite strikes, especially when a union is ill prepared. Those extremely hard bargaining positions taken. And last but not least, firing union activists. In about a third or so of union campaigns in the United States, in new organizing campaigns, workers are fired for union activity, which is against the law in the U.S., but the penalties are very, very weak. And these things are not unique or rare. About 75% of U.S. firms hire anti-union consultants when workers try and organize new unions. Okay, who are the union busters? So U.S. law firms, anti-union law firms, play a very large role. I mentioned Littler Mendelsohn before, but there's Seyfarth Shaw, Jackson Lewis, Ogletree Deakins. Ogletree is also expanding in Europe, in addition to Littler Mendelsohn. Jackson Lewis, I believe, has always had a presence in England. Some of these firms make guarantees. They actually, guarantee wins and say you don't pay if we don't win. It's a very aggressive style of how these groups work. There are labor relations consultants. Many of them have ties to the military and to other right-wing bodies in the U.S. And then there's also just the general U.S. business culture. In business schools in the United States, there's a presumptive anti-union bias. And as we see more international students coming to the U.S. to study business, it's a concern of our labor movement that we're exporting some of these extremely harmful ideas. So how do you beat them? What are the ways to beat the union busters? The first is to unmask the enemy, and to expose that a firm is using a consultant is a very powerful method. To ask who profits from whatever the position that they're taking, to expose the profits that the union busters are making. Oftentimes, union busting is used in a time when a company is in crisis financially, but they will spend mightily on these union busters. And as a campaign tactic, I've had a number of organizing campaigns where we've completely undermined the employer's campaign by showing how much the hourly rate for the law firm, or how many union busters have been hired to work on the campaign at the same time as the company is pleading poverty. To build solidarity through systematic one-on-one internal organizing. When we say internal organizing in the US context, we mean getting workers to do something that they're not already doing. And the best means we've determined to do that in our context is to train stewards, activists in our unions to talk to workers one-on-one, to find out what their issues are, and to move them to activity. So this leads to the third bullet, to demonstrate solidarity through public actions, whether this is petitions or demonstrations. Mobilizing people to fight back is a key part of beating back the union buster. Developing independent expertise. So oftentimes when companies plead poverty, the union has to have the financial analysis, the expertise in the whole industry to counter that narrative, both at the bargaining table and in the public sphere. Finding allies for the fight, whether it's community organizations, religious organizations, environmental organizations, to find people other, in addition to the labor movement, who are aligned with your fight, because oftentimes the union buster attack is on the institution of the labor movement. Finding other outside validators can be a very, very powerful tool. And to finally, use new and old media to expose this effort and to, as the campaign machine to fight back, whether that's online petitions, social media, video, memes, et cetera, to make these fights public is incredibly important. And that wraps up my presentation. I've shared some materials with Halda as well, especially on internal organizing, that might be helpful just to understand where we're coming from and what we've seen work. Thank you.
Já, þetta var mjög athyglisvert að sjá vegna þess að það sem hann var að tala í sambandi við þetta niðurbrot verkalýðshreyfingarinnar á sér þetta lengri sögu, og ég vona að ég festist nú ekki í einhverja eldgamalli sögu í þessu, en það er ágætt að rifja upp frá fyrstu áratugum verkalýðshreyfingarinnar, og það átti við náttúrulega í Bandaríkjunum og líka hér á Íslandi, að þá reyndu atvinnurekendur að hunsa verkalýðsfélögin. Og það voru svona 3 aðferðir til þess að reyna að halda þeim niðri. Og í fyrsta lagi þá var það með því að hunsa félögin og láta eins og þau væri ekki til. Og í framhaldi af því voru náttúrulega til ýmis ráð, og það var að ýta forystumönnunum bara út, neita þeim vinnu og ofsækja þá, hrekja þá helst burt úr byggðarlaginu, og sérstaklega halda þeim frá vinnu, sem að mjög oft á bernsku dögunum dugði, því að reynsla verkafólks var lítil og samstaðan og félagsþroskinn var náttúrulega ekki komið til staðar. En smátt og smátt þá tók þetta nú að breytast, og þegar að atvinnurekendur sáu það, þeir gátu ekki komið í veg fyrir að félögin yrðu til, að þá var það nú oft á tíðum að þeir reyndu að hafa áhrif á félögin með því að senda inn verkstjórana sína eða einhverja aðra talsmenn inn í félögin, og fyrst og fremst var það til þess að félög vítt og breitt landið og í ýmsum öðrum starfsgreinum gengju ekki í heildarsamtökin. Það var alveg frægt þegar að Grímur í Súðavík bauðst til þess að ganga öllum kröfum verkalýðsfélagsins og meira að segja að stofna sjúkrasjóð sem hann reyndar átt að ráða sjálfur yfir, ef að félagið gengi ekki í alþýðusambandi. Og þetta gerðist líka í Bolungarvík og Ólafsvík og fleiri stöðum. Yfirleitt gekk þetta nú ekki upp, þó er kannski hægt að finna einstök dæmi. En þetta gerðist reyndar líka í félögum eða á stöðum þar sem samvinnuhreyfingin var sterk, eins og til dæmis á Hólmavík eða Borðeyri eða Höfn í Hornafirði, að þá mættu bara hreinlega kaupfélagsstjórarnir á fundi hjá verkalýðsfélögunum, stofnfundina, og sögðu að þetta var náttúrulega algjör óþarfi vegna þess að allir væri í kaupfélaginu og þyrfti ekkert verkalýðsfélag. Og þetta áttu þeir við að etja á nokkrum stöðum og var til þess að sum félög gengu ekki í Alþýðusambandið vegna þessa. En þessi áhrif, þau duttu nú út eftir því sem að félögin þroskuðust. Það er að segja að atvinnurekendur gætu tekið félögin svona yfir innan frá. En þá var komið að síðasta atriðinu og það var það að á nokkrum stöðum reyndu menn að stofna eigin óháð félög. Það er að segja neituðu eða hunsuðu verkalýðsfélög sem voru í tengslu við Alþýðusambandið en létu búa til önnur félög við hliðina. Og þetta var nú mest áberandi þar sem að reynt var að kljúfa samstöðu verkafólks og sjómanna með því að etja því fram að ef að verkafólkið fengi hækkuð laun þá yrði útgerðarmaðurinn að lækka laun sjómanna eða hlut sjómannanna í staðinn. Og þetta nú frægt í bókmenntunum því að þetta náttúrulega það sem kemur fram í Sölku Völku hjá Halldóri Laxness. Það einmitt verið að etja saman sjómönnunum, smábátasjómönnunum og svo verkafólkinu. Og þetta gerðist í raun og veru bæði í Súðavík og Bolungarvík og örugglega víðar. Þar sem að voru stofnuð svona sjómannafélög eða smábátaeigendafélög sem að börðust gegn verkalýðsfélögunum. Vegna þess að þeim var att saman með þessum hætti. En þetta breytir svo allt saman. Ég ætla ekki að fara út í flóknari sögu innri átök í verkalýðshreyfingunni sem að stundum leiddu til þess að félög voru stofnuð 1 og 2 á hverjum stað. Við erum fyrst og fremst að hugsa það sem að atvinnurekendur reyndu að hafa áhrif. Og með vinnulöggjöfinni 1938 að þá komst á, má segja, fríður þetta að atvinnurekendur hunsuðu ekki verkalýðsfélög, gátu það ekki lengur og þeir hættu að mestu að reyna að hafa þessi áhrif á félögin eða stofna önnur ný. Og þetta sagði að Kristján hefði gerst líka í Bandaríkjunum undir New Deal hjá Roosevelt og svo í seinni heimsstyrjöldinni þegar verkalýðshreyfingin náði ákveðnum áhrifum í Bandaríkjunum. Og þessi áhrif náðu miklu lengra hér á Íslandi þar sem að verkalýðshreyfingin var mjög sterk á 5., 7., 7., 8. áratug aldarinnar síðustu og það ríkti svona ákveðin fríður. Til dæmis varð vinnulöggjöfin líka til þess að lögreglan tók ekki þátt og var ekki hægt að beita yfirvöldum og lögreglu gegn verkföllum, til dæmis 52, 55 og síðar, eins og gert var í mörgum öðrum löndum. En svo má segja að eftir 1990 með frjálshyggjunni þá fer að örla á þessu aftur að atvinnurekendur fara að reyna að nýta sér einhverja veikleika í annarkvort inn í félagslega styrk verkalýðshreyfingarinnar eða þá lagalegu hliðinni og það voru komið upp nokkur dæmi, sérstaklega í útgerðinni, að atvinnurekendur reyndu að fá einstakar áhafnir á skipum til þess að búa til sín eigin verkalýðsfélög. Þetta gerðist á Tálknafirði veit ég og líka á Akureyri þar sem var byrjað að ræða þetta undir einhverju, held ég samherja undirfélagi eða einhverju slíku. Þegar átti að reyna að fækka í áhöfnum togarana. Og verkalýðshreyfingin stóð frammi fyrir þessu ákveðnu tímabili, sérstaklega sjómannasamtökin. En svo hefur ekki borið neitt á þessu fyrir þá allt í einu núna í deilunni við Icelandair og Flugfreyjur. Þá kemur þetta allt í einu upp aftur að þeir geti bara stofnað annað félag og samið við það. En önnur atriði sem Kristján nefnir í þessu sambandi áróðurinn og hvernig fulltrúar atvinnurekenda nýta sér ráðgjafafyrirtæki, fjölmiðla og kannski fjölmiðlafyrirtæki, við vitum svo sem ekki nógu mikið þetta, en við vitum að samtök atvinnurekenda eru orðin gríðarlega sterk fjárhagslega og nýta sér þetta núorðið miklu meira áberandi heldur en að við höfum séð hingað til á Íslandi. Og það svona vekur manni ákveðin ugg, en þetta byrjað að birtast og Já, ég held að ég láti þetta duga. Takk.